So thank you again. I should just give some clarity to add to what Warren said. Since most of you haven't heard me talk before, I'm pretty sure. So he said that I study contracts, which is kind of right. But really, and I think Cecil knows this, and maybe Art knows it, I don't study contracts. I study one specific part of contracts. Like the stuff in the miscellaneous section at the back of the contracts that we refer to as boilerplate. And like I've spent my entire career studying those 3 pages. So there's a reason I don't get invited to talk a lot of places. And sometimes people make mistakes. And so here I am. I set an alarm. It's right by Julia, so I will try to stop at 20 minutes. So now this project, it's work with co-authors Mark Weidemeyer and Ugo Panizza, an economist and a litigator. It is the most fun project I've ever worked on, but that doesn't mean that the 5 years of research we've done translates easily into a nice story. So I'm kind of hoping at some point, if you see the story or you just want me to stop talking, you'll raise your hand. Cecil, I'm counting on you. So let me start with the story. Some of these images will be familiar to you, those of you who are my age and a little bit older than me. I tried to ask my students about Cambodia and the killing fields and the Khmer Rouge, and I had maybe like 2 students who knew about it. So I realized that the world has changed. But this project is called The Reluctant Creditor, and you'll see why. So the story for me starts at a debt conference I was in Florence. So if you study obscure boilerplate, you do get to go to fun conferences in really exciting places. So everybody uses boilerplate. And it was at dinner at the conference, and one of the international organization folks from UNCTAD, I think, was telling sort of entertaining dinner story. And his entertaining story was about Hillary Clinton. So this was 2022, and he said, I went to Cambodia in 2012 to help the Cambodian government deal with its debt problems. And the problem there was this evil person, Hillary Clinton. Everybody American was evil at that table, but Hillary was particularly evil for them. And she went to Cambodia and demanded that Cambodia pay back debts that had been incurred by the Cambodian government in 1970 to 75. There was sort of a military government in Cambodia at that point. We had potentially, with the assistance of the CIA, it's not really clear, helped overthrow Prince Sihanouk. And this government borrows about $300 million or so in exchange, mostly for agricultural products. And that then, according to the dinner conversation, is really the trade-off for the US being allowed to bomb the hell out of Cambodia. So if you know a little bit of this history, we dropped more bombs on Cambodia than the Allies dropped during all of World War II. I think there's a sort of a famous quote from Nixon to Kissinger about anything that flies on anything that moves. And the idea was that we were going to use all the aircraft possible to kill everybody possible in the border areas, which was what it was believed that the Viet Cong were using Cambodia to hide. So this was a debt, and it was interesting to me, the story about Hillary Clinton going to Cambodia and demanding this debt back was interesting because this was a topic that I had worked on. Now, I was partially interested because it seemed like it connected to an 18th century doctrine called the doctrine of war debts. And now the doctrine of war debts, which I don't expect anybody here to be familiar with, except for Paul, is a doctrine that says that if you support the losing side in a war, and particularly a civil war, then the winning side doesn't have to pay those debts. Okay, I'm a law professor. So can I ask a question? Does this sound familiar to anybody? Like, most of you went to law school, right? The Constitution? The 14th Amendment? I know some of you know this answer because I have Section 4? Oh, Leslie. Oh. Okay, Section 4 of the 14th Amendment is the provision that says we will not pay the rebel debt. The rebel debt will never be paid. And so this has always puzzled those of us who are interested in debt. It's like, where did this come from? Like, why is it in the Constitution? And some people have these cockamamie stories about how this was, all about oppressing the South or the rich Northerners. But it's quite possible that this was just standard international law of the time. Right? You don't pay rebel debts. The British are quite familiar with this from the Boer War and things like that. But this is sort of, I've always been curious. But it was important for contemporary reasons for this. So, okay, questions. I like to have people participate because I teach 1Ls. Do you recognize these people? All right, so Assad has been overthrown, 2025. And Syria, we're trying, if you work in the international community, we're trying to get Syria's new government, if it doesn't turn out to be horrible, back up to speed, back to developing, and they have a lot of debt. They have about $50 billion worth of debt. Much of that debt has been accumulated during Civil War period from 2011. And it's almost all to those gentlemen. It's about $30 billion is Iran and Russia, and it's all military debt. Now, the Syrian government doesn't want to pay to Iran or Russia. And the question is there any legal doctrine that could help it not pay or help it avoid payment? And if there exists a doctrine of war debts that maybe the Americans would support because, they have it in their constitution. This argument I have tried before, it doesn't actually ever work. Because like you, nobody else knows about Section 4 of the 14th Amendment. But this could be important. Anyway, this is sort of why I was interested in this. Also, I have personal reasons, and I wanted an excuse to put a picture up of me from when I was young, and I had darker hair. This was in 2004, when I was younger and brighter. I worked on Iraq's debt. And that was my mentor, my dear friend Lee Buchheit. And the question then was, do we have to, because we'd taken over Iraq, do we have to pay Saddam's $100 billion worth of debt? And much of Saddam's debt was incurred to put down the Kurds and things like that. And so I was tasked as the low-level employee here with finding precedent. It's international law, so there was no law, but you had to find precedent. And I went looking, and all I could find was there was some stuff from the Spanish-American War. That's kind of old. Okay, I was hoping to see reaction. Spanish-American War was old. But that was really it. And I didn't know about this Cambodia thing. Now, to go back to the Hillary Clinton story, the story was Hillary goes to Cambodia and asks for the money back. But the Cambodians say no. And they say no because this was money that you gave to the losers, who you put in place because you overthrew the good guy. And then worse, as a result of what you did, the Khmer Rouge came into power, and then we had the worst years of our country's history. And so you, the Americans, should pay us. But how can you possibly ask us to repay these debts? So in Cambodia, they call them the dirty debts. And Prime Minister Hun Sen loved to give speeches about the Americans and the evil Hillary Clinton and the evil Barack Obama and then the evil Donald Trump, although at some point they decided Donald Trump was not evil and nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. But that's a whole different story that is also relevant and comes at the end. But I was interested from a geeky law professor perspective, like, was there really precedent? And if the US Treasury Department knew, why didn't they tell me? I was working for the US Treasury Department for no pay, essentially, so they could have helped me. All right. Cambodia, bombing was bad. If you know any of that history, I mean, I've learned a lot more about it. It's sort of just amazing how horrible it was. The US government has an ugly history with Cambodia. We supported. Anybody seen Killing Fields? It won an Academy Award, I think. Very depressing movie. First They Came for My Father, the movie. You people do not spend as much time watching Netflix as I do, clearly. But the US supported the Khmer Rouge government even after it was overthrown in 1979. They only had 4 years within which they killed more people than in the history of Cambodia. Just amazing what destruction they did. We supported them, I think, for at least 10 years. After they're overthrown, we support them as the government in exile and them having the United Nations seat. Until this guy, this journalist, writes the book that becomes The Killing Fields. He writes the book, a movie is made, and people realize how horrible that was. And this is what turns sort of Cambodia completely around. And then we support the investigations into the genocide and bringing them back into the fold. But all of this debt happens. So I won't tell you about the 1995 Paris Club, where it's the first time. This is Lon Nol, the military dictator who we put in place after Prince Sihanouk is removed. All right, so here, I went down this story about Hillary Clinton. Even though there is this whole vilification of Hillary Clinton, as we all know, everywhere. But there's a documentary record about her trip to Cambodia. She's the first Secretary of State that goes to Cambodia. So did she really ask for the debt to be paid? So we couldn't find the evidence, so we did interviews. We now have done over 75 interviews with government officials. Turns out government officials, once they retire, were willing to tell you everything. No more confidentiality. And so all of these people are retired if they aren't dead. But it turns out this was complete fabrication, the story that she demanded the money. Her staff told us that she wasn't even told about the debt when she went to Cambodia. And the Cambodian government didn't ask her about the debt. She goes to this meeting with students. This is I think these are the pictures. I tried to figure out the actual pictures from the meeting. It's these young girls. And one of the things about Hillary you might know or not know, and I refer to her by first name even though she doesn't return my calls. I did try to reach her. Is that she did a lot of these meetings, and it wasn't really publicized. But this was a big thing for her. And at one of these meetings, one of these girls asks her about what are you going to do about the debt. And she says, I'm going to fix it. Like, I think this is an embarrassing thing. Our history is embarrassing. And I'm going to do whatever I can to fix this. And so she says this in 2010. And we know from our research that she sends a team in 2011 to Cambodia to fix this. And the Cambodians send her back. They don't talk to them. They're like, we have no interest in this. It's a dirty debt. We have no interest in resolving it. 2012, she goes back to Cambodia. She's not this time only visiting the Cambodian government. It's an ASEAN conference, so she happens to be there. She goes again with the preparation. And this time, they have prepared a memo for her about why they shouldn't have to pay the debt. So we found the memo. People leak all sorts of stuff. It's really wonderful how leaky the US government can be, and every international organization. The problem, though, was that there is no war debts assertion in the memo. The assertion in the memo is, this is the memo that we found. The assertion in the memo is that you gave us a bunch of food in exchange for us owing you money. The loans were all made through the agricultural department. You gave us a bunch of food in exchange for the money, and we didn't get the food because we've seen from the invoices that the food was delivered to Vietnam, Korea, and Thailand. So they're like, how can you charge us for food that you delivered to other countries? Plus there was tobacco and cotton. And they're like, why are you giving us tobacco and cotton in the middle of a civil war? That's really not stuff we could have eaten in a famine. So they're like, this is just completely fake. But if you know anything about these agricultural loans, the US mostly they gave rice. So 1970s US government approved rice. Anybody have any familiarity with that? So if you read government records from the soldiers and people, we used to give it to soldiers. It's just apparently was so horrible that nobody wanted to eat US government rice, even in a famine. So there are all these hilarious comments about the low quality of the rice, and the Vietnamese would send it to Cambodia, Cambodia would send it to Thailand. But the food that arrived was really for money. It was sold and then the money was used. And the money was used for military purposes, that's clear. It was also used maybe to buy bidets. People were very French in Cambodia, so they liked bidets, military officers. So there's some fun stuff about bidets. All right. Okay, fast forward. I'm done with the Cambodia part. Really, I just think, I can't find a doctrine of war debts. Project's useless. Can't turn in my trip receipts to Leslie. She's gonna be like, you didn't write any paper, so I just paid for it myself. But 2025, I got asked to go on a trip for the World Bank because Cambodia is having a crisis. They have a war with Thailand, a little border war with Thailand. They ran out of money. And so the thought is that they might be able to tap people like Cecil to help them do a bond issue. And this is kind of stuff that I do. Like, how do you do the documentation? If you can't hire Cecil, then you come to me. I work for free, and I could help you like look at the documents. So I go there. And the question that they ask me after I do my talk, which is utterly useless because they have no interest or ability to raise money on the international markets, but I was happy to go to Cambodia, so I do my talk, and they say, can you come to a meeting? And they don't invite the people on my team who are from the World Bank, which is a little strange because I'm at the bottom of the barrel in the team. They're the official World Bank people, and then there's me, who doesn't own a suit. And I didn't wear a suit there either, even though I was official. And so I go to the meeting, and at the meeting, so I brought pictures for you. from the meeting. One of the amazing things in Cambodia is everybody's so young. I'm by far the oldest person. Because everybody, like, they all got killed. Like, this is, like, there's just no old people there. And the old people, like, and at the meeting they say, can you tell us how to pay the debt? We have figured out that we got the food. There's no evidence of this, but we have figured out we got the food. We want to pay. Can you tell us which bank account we pay into? Like, I don't know which bank account you pay into. But they suddenly needed financing from the International Monetary Fund. And the International Monetary Fund had said, if you owe money, what is called arrears, to the United States, we cannot give you new financing. So just pay. And they thought their questions were like, how much do we have to pay so we're in good standing again? And I'm like, I don't know, $1? Like, but by this time, I have realized from our research that the US for 50 years has never tried to get paid. In fact, every time this comes up, US government officials just put their head in the sand and say, no, we don't want to hear about it. So Cambodia owes us 300 million or so. We've given Cambodia well over $1 billion in assistance for all sorts of things, and we want to give them more, but you can't write off the debts legally. There's some kind of law. And so this has remained on the books. So I met with the US government officials, and then they say, we don't know who to give the money to. On one side of this picture is the US Embassy, and the other side is the Cambodian Debt Office, and literally you could open the window and yell at them. And so I give them their other emails. So I'll stop now. If you have any questions, I'd be delighted. Well, thank you very much for indulging me.